So the Grammy nominations have just come out, and people have things to say about them. Actually, I wouldn't know, since I'm recording this before they've actually been released, but I'm fairly confident that some people are upset, others are happy, and everyone is putting in their predictions as to who they think should and should not win. Because they always do. I mean, it's the Grammys. And every year, I feel like we have the exact same conversation, that the Grammys are a scam. They're not worth our time, they don't matter, and it's all just a spectacle to hand the same popular musicians their awards and move on without recognizing real talent. And here's the thing, I actually grew up on a lot of these award shows. I have a lot of fond memories of me and my family sitting down to watch the Grammys, the Oscars, the AMAs, all these different big award shows and see the performances, the speeches. But nowadays, in an era of streaming, in an era of fandoms being so divided, in an era of these award shows almost doing too much to try to get people to want to watch them, part of me kind of feels like these award shows are becoming somewhat of a joke. And at the same time, though, everyone is still tuning in to see who are the nominees, who are going to be the winners. These competitions still exist and will continue to exist for years to come, especially something like the Grammys, where the big General 4 awards are some of the most coveted awards in music ever. So the question I want to answer in this video is, are the Grammys inherently flawed? Or is it our perception of the Grammys that's flawed? And whatever it is, should we be doing something to fix that? Or are the Grammys not actually worth our attention? This is going to be a little video essay exploring some of my own personal takes on these questions and what I think it all could mean for the upcoming Grammys. So let's just jump right in.
And the Grammy goes to...
The biggest concern I think people have with the Grammys, and really anything that pits one artist against another, is the idea that music should not be a competition. I want you to really think about how they decide these awards. Let's take Song of the Year, for example. Let's go to Wikipedia. Song of the Year, according to the Grammys, is presented to honor artistic achievement, technical proficiency, and overall excellence in the recording industry without regard to album sales or chart position. What the hell does that mean? like seriously, what does that actually mean? Song of the Year, I've always seen as an award for songwriting and song composition because the award is specifically given and dedicated to the writer of the song, whoever wrote the lyrics or melodies or, whatever it might be. And here's a little bit of a thought experiment. Let's say you gathered 100 of the most qualified songwriters in the world, and you picked 10 songs that you thought were really well written, really good songs, and you gave them to this committee and asked them to pick the number one best song. Do you think they would all agree? Do you even think a majority would agree? Personally, I don't think they would, because there's so many forms of bias that creep in. I want you to really think about that, because ultimately that is what the Grammys are doing. They're picking out 8 to 10 of the best songs, then they're giving it to some committee, which again, assuming that they have the best intentions in mind and that they are qualified to answer this question, now have to pick one of those songs to be the best of the best. I mean, let's look at the 2024 Grammy Song of the Year nominations, for example. The winner was What Was I Made For by Billie Eilish, which if you watched my most recent video, you'll know. I absolutely adore this song. I love it with all my heart, and I do think it is very, very well written and composed and all that stuff that makes it, Song of the Year worthy. So it's definitely a worthy option. I could imagine a lot of people being able to support this for, concrete, objective reasons, tending to its artistic achievement and technical proficiency, all these kind of grandiose terms. My personal pick when I was observing the Grammys last year was A&W by Lana Del Rey, because of my personal preference for its songwriting capacity. But my own biases influence that. I've listened to it more. Maybe it speaks to me more on a personal level. Maybe I know more about Lana Del Rey's own kind of backstory influencing this song, which makes it feel more powerful to me. And these are the same kinds of biases that are going to creep up on even the best, most qualified songwriters. I mean, what objectively defines good songwriting? The number of literary devices you use, the rhyme scheme, the length of the song? There's so many things that go into it. Even with the most objective lens possible, even if the Grammys committee had the best intentions, taking away the popularity and what the fans think and any of that, would it be possible to assign a true quantitative score that everyone agrees on to help you rank which is the best? Honestly, no, I don't think so. I mean, look at music reviews. Music reviews are more subjective, that is the point. It's this one person giving their opinion, but in theory, they are supposed to be more qualified people. And yet, a single album, nowadays especially, gets vastly different scores across a wide range. Why? The answer is obvious, because music is subjective. That's the whole beauty of it. Music speaks to different people in different ways. Let's also talk about Album of the Year, since that's, what everyone loves to talk about. It's arguably the most coveted award of the entire year. This might upset some of y'all, but what is the actual only objective, quantitative way to determine the number one album of the year? Success, sales, charts, streaming. The reason being, these are numbers that you cannot contest. Let's go back to Song of the Year, right? I said my pick was A&W. Whatever criteria I think makes A&W the best Song of the Year is something that someone else can disagree with, right? It's, again, pretty subjective. However, the criteria that make an album the most successful album, let's say on the charts in this year, is not something that can be contested. That is a number. That is a fact. That is not an opinion anymore. So in theory, that is the only truly quantitative factor that goes into determining an album's net worth, so to say. But is that a reflection of quality? Is that a reflection of, once again, artistic achievement? I think you guys know where I'm going with this. Whether you like it or not, the Tortured Poets Department is the most successful album of 2024. Sales-wise, on the charts, it has just done extremely well. But I'm sure a lot of people do not think it should win Album of the Year. And I'm not just talking about people who love to hate on Taylor Swift just to hate on Taylor Swift. I'm even talking about within the Swiftie community. I'm talking about myself. I don't think it should win Album of the Year. And here's a real question that I think is going to come up a lot in the coming days. Do we think the Tortured Poets Department can win Album of the Year? Do we think the Grammys committee is willing to give Taylor Swift, AOTY, once again, the most coveted award at the Grammys twice in a row, especially for an album that, while it was very commercially successful, has been subjected to very mixed reviews. When it comes to the charts, this is another way that people constantly say music should not be a competition, music should not be a competition, because it reduces the artistic merit behind all these different albums being released to a single number, which just doesn't feel right, I think, to a lot of people, and it doesn't feel right to me either. And this is why Album of the Year always leads to controversy. It will never be agreed upon. Again, if you took 100 of the best music critics and put them all in a room, I don't think they would agree on Album of the Year. I don't even think a majority would, because there's so many factors that go into making a good, successful album. Now here is the catch to all of this. I've been saying all this assuming the Grammy Selection Committee has the best intentions, that they are really trying their hardest to analyze the music from an objective lens with people who are qualified to do so. And that even then, even in that case, there will still be flaws in the system. Guess what? The Grammys aren't doing that most of the time. I think through certain statements, it's pretty obvious that the Grammy Selection Committee does not use their best possible judgment. The Grammys website does say that the judgments and decisions for nominations and final voting are determined by members of the Academy who are approved to be experts and active workers in the craft that they are judging. Then why are we getting statements like this? I try to be ecumenical, but there's a significant percentage of music I've never heard. It's a lot of work to listen to all of it. I guess I'm a bad voter because I didn't do my diligence, but that's my right. Interesting. With Beyoncé, the fact that every time she does something new, it's a big event, and everyone's supposed to quake in their shoes. It's a little too portentous. Girl, you sound a little bit too portentous. I'm a huge Coldplay fan, even more than Harry Styles. This isn't their best album, but I would love to see them get a Grammy. I didn't vote for either Adele or Beyoncé in any of the top categories. I love Beyoncé's album and have been a fan of Adele, but I feel that they've already won a lot of Grammys. Again, going through a lot of these testimonies, like a lot of these do feel pretty legit, they're putting thought into it, but they're very different across all the people, and as you can tell, there are so many different inherent biases that are creeping in. So it doesn't really matter if these are, experts in their field, when there's no true objective way to decide this. I mean, think about all the artists who have never won a Grammy. Demi Lovato, Lana Del Rey, Katy Perry, Snoop Dogg, the list goes on. And at that point, it's not even about, the Grammys just taking the side of whoever is the most popular. These artists have had massive, massive impacts comparable to those who are winning Grammys, and yet somehow they haven't won anything. So I think it's pretty clear that the Grammys are not necessarily a proper objective metric of quality or even success. And when it comes to my personal opinion on this, I mean, yeah, it's kind of strange. What is the point behind assigning one song or record to be the best and give them all this praise when a majority of people probably would not agree, considering the sheer unlimited number of songs and records released every single year? Well, regardless of those feelings, these competitions still exist. Someone is still going to be chosen. And for all this outcry people have that music shouldn't be a competition, those same people still get mad that someone does end up winning. It's a paradox I'm always baffled by. If the Grammys are a scam and don't matter whatsoever, why are you still mad that your favorite artist didn't win? I thought you should be able to appreciate your favorite artist regardless of if they're winning Grammys or not. Sounds like you really do care about the Grammys. And I think it's totally natural to care. It's a strange, flawed system, I acknowledge that. I still care. You probably do care, and you do put some value on these awards, even if you think it's a scam. So what can we do then to change our perception of the Grammys and better align these conflicting feelings? My answer is probably not much.
And the Grammy goes to...
Here's another quick little thought experiment for you. You are on your way to work and you get cut off by someone in traffic. What are you likely to assume about the person that cut you off? Probably that they're a bad driver. Better yet, that they're a bad person. Maybe you'll mutter a few cuss words to yourself at the wheel. You know, I've been there before, we've all done it. Now let's say that you're at work and you just got a call that your dog is really sick and you need to head home immediately. And so you do, and in your stress, you cut someone else off in traffic. What are you likely to now attribute your reasons for cutting that person off? Well, it was a one-time thing. I had to get home. I was in a tough situation. I'm not a bad driver. I just made one mistake. This difference that we tend to make assigning different reasons for the same mistakes that we make versus other strangers is called the fundamental attribution error. And it's a pretty well-documented psychological phenomenon. Now, why am I talking about this in this video? Well, I think the fundamental attribution error actually can explain a lot of our reactions to the Grammys and why, amidst all the chaos of the Grammys, knowing that they're not super legit, why it ends up making us feel so annoyed and hurt, you know? And I think the reason is that as fans of these artists, we tend to associate their success with our own. And I think there's kind of two reasons behind that. Again, going back to the traffic example, one reason that you might give more forgiving reasons for your own bad behavior is that you know your situation. You know that you had to get home. You were in an emergency. Whereas with that stranger, you have no idea whether they were in an emergency or if they're just a bad driver and do that all the time. And I think that applies to our favorite artists too. We have intimate knowledge of the kind of work they put into their music, whereas we don't really have that with artists that we're not fans of. And so when our favorite artists don't win and don't get recognized for the work that we know they've worked so hard to make, it feels worse than when some other random artist doesn't get recognized, even though they probably put in the same amount of work. I think one of the most prominent examples of how knowledge really warps our perception of the Grammys is when Bonnie Raitt won Song of the Year in 2023. A lot of people were clowning on this simply because people didn't know who she was. Simply for that fact, people correlated a lack of knowledge about this song with this idea that she should not have won. Which is so interesting because y'all clown the Grammys for being a popularity contest and then go back and reinforce that principle. But anyways, I mean, look at her. She was shocked too, but like, let her have her moment.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
If you look at the lyrics to this song, it's actually a pretty sad, heartfelt, and unique concept for a song, and it's very well written.
When I saw the story on the news of this woman that had met this man that had her son's heart, and he said, "Would you like to listen to it? Sit next to me and put your head on my chest." Because things have been so tough the last few years, I just broke open and I just was inspired.
But again, people dismissed it because they didn't know it. On the flip side, I think another great example of, again, knowledge warping our perception, at least within the Swiftie community, is with Reputation. I know a lot of Swifties, including myself, have our opinions on Reputation not getting a single Grammy nomination in the Big Four. But I do think a big part of that is the fact that we as fans have very intimate knowledge of the trials and tribulations that Taylor Swift went through to craft and create this album and come back essentially from almost having her entire career taken away from her. Whereas a lot of outside perceivers just kind of see this as another album, you know? So yeah, our knowledge of the award winners can have a huge impact on, again, our perception of if the Grammys are fair or not, even when that inherently isn't fair to judge something that you don't know. I think the other, though more important reason the fundamental attribution error plays into this is that we tend to associate ourselves very directly with our favorite celebrities. And that's not really due to parasocial relationships. That's not what I'm getting at. Think about sports. In sports, a lot of people will say, we won that match. We're doing super well. We're heading to the playoffs, you know? And I always was confused by that as a non-sports person. I'm like, you're not on the field. Why are you saying we? But being very involved in music, I see that all the time. And I do think it's kind of different because here's the thing. Fans are actually very directly responsible for their favorite artist's success. Because as an artist, when you put out music, you cannot be recognized if you aren't getting streams, if you aren't getting attention from your fans. Look at Brat. Brat would not have been as successful and as mainstream as it ended up becoming if Charli XCX's fans themselves did not push for this album. Because Charli XCX has been putting out music for a very long time, but Brat in particular really caught the public eye because fans saw a lot of potential in it and did more to, push it into the mainstream. So if Brat wins a Grammy in some regard, fans are going to feel part of that. I mean, think about Grammy speeches. Who do they always thank? The fans. This wouldn't have been possible without the fans. You're made to feel like you were part of that victory as a fan. And so the fundamental attribution error comes swinging back in, because now those same errors you make attributing your own successes and failures versus other strangers applies here. When your favorite artist wins, that's because they worked hard for it. They deserved it. We fought for this award. We made it happen. This was the right decision to make. When someone else wins the award, someone that you're not a fan of, they didn't deserve the award. They didn't work as hard. This was just a one-time thing. Do you see how this all plays together? And it's natural to want to see your favorite artist succeed, but does that mean that they're always going to get recognized? When we know that the show is flawed, when we know that there isn't an actually true objective way to say that one album is better than another, how can we expect the Grammys to always make the right decision? We can't. And so, because it's kind of random and arbitrary and just depends on the biases of the committee in that moment, we jump to these attributions. I also think this ties into a flawed perception we have that the Grammys are fair. Again, it's tied to this idea that since they're so prestigious, they should be making objective decisions. But that doesn't necessarily translate to fairness. And by fairness, I mean multiple artists getting the same amount of awards. Go back to what I said earlier, that there are some very talented, very successful artists who have never won a single Grammy. Meanwhile, in a single year, one artist might win all the Grammys. And that really is what pisses people off. I mean, take the year that Billie Eilish, swept the Big Four, right? That rarely ever happens. And when it did, people were mad. Even people who aren't that invested in music, who aren't fans of any particular artist, trying to see their favorite artist succeed, I think a lot of people were still just put off by this. Damn, one person can win all 4 awards. Doesn't that seem a little bit unfair? But when was fairness ever a criteria? The Grammys have never guaranteed that each of the Big Four is going to go to someone different. Again, that's just kind of an expectation we've put onto the Grammys. I'm not saying all this to criticize fans and to criticize people who criticize the Grammys. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. It's actually the opposite. I'm saying that this is all a very natural way that we, not just as fans, but as just human beings, process any sort of competition. And going back to my earlier point, especially when that's a competition of something that can't truly be objectively measured and ranked, the whole thing just kind of falls apart right in front of us. And yet here we are, still paying attention, still hoping that they make the right decisions. So what does any of this mean? Does that mean we should just stop paying attention entirely?
And the Grammy goes to...
I want to talk briefly about the idea of spectacle, because I feel like with a lot of these big award shows, when people start to become disillusioned with them, they start to treat them like spectacles. But what does that word really mean? There's a really interesting book called The Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord, and I'm going to try to explain the concept of the spectacle as he describes it as best as I can. It's kind of like a reality within a reality, where you take everyday aspects of real life and you twist them and break them and restructure them into this new kind of reality. And so it seems like your normal life. It has all the same elements of it, but it's not. It's a spectacle. It's fake, and it's been fragmented for you, kind of like a simulation, you know? So you might be wondering, why am I bringing up theory and philosophy into a video about the fucking Grammys? Well, like I said, in a way, the Grammys feel somewhat self-serving. If the Grammys are so broken and inherently flawed, if all this decision-making just serves to promote the artists who campaigned the hardest, the artists who are most popular, or just, whatever the selection committee happens to be feeling in that moment, then isn't it all kind of like a spectacle? Like they've taken something real, which is celebrating music and giving extra praise to certain artists and albums that were especially impactful and meaningful, and broken that into this new form of reality that seems to do those things, but really doesn't actually get anything done anymore. And I think it's very natural to feel that way about the Grammys, especially again, when your favorite artists aren't getting recognized at all. Then why should we care? Why should we pay attention? Why does this get to be the biggest event of the year for the music industry? Well, if the Grammys are turning into a spectacle, there must be something real within there that was once there maybe and is still kind of there, but maybe it's just kind of getting distorted by fan wars. Maybe it's getting distorted by our unreasonable expectations of the Grammys. Honestly, I don't really know. I haven't even mentioned this throughout the video, but if you live in the United States, you're probably aware of another very important event that happened this week that will change the lives of millions of people. And so when you look at that, and then you look at the Grammy nominations, it's almost laughable how unimportant these are. You know, how we're putting so much time and thought into, again, this kind of silly little award show that isn't really even that good in the first place. And honestly, it's a hard thing to grapple with. Even putting this video together was so difficult because part of me was like, what is the point? Why am I sitting here spending my time making these silly little YouTube videos about music when there are bigger issues in the world? But I think if we have that mindset, we're only hurting ourselves. We're only leading ourselves into a downward spiral. The reason I make these videos is because I like to talk about music. I like to critique it. I like to rank it. I like to analyze it. And having built, somewhat of a following in these last few months, I like to have these conversations with you guys about these artists and see what you guys think as well. And I have a ton of fun with it. Music is one of the few things that keeps me going these days, to be fully honest, and this channel is one of the main ways that I can show that, whether you guys perceive that or not. And in a way, aren't the Grammys just kind of like that too? This is where the importance of the Grammys can shine through. At the end of the day, sure, your favorite artist might get robbed, and there might not be a truly fair way to determine the best songs, records, or albums released each year, as the Grammys so desperately try to do. But we still tune in, and we still watch for those rare moments where they do make the right decision, where artists give heartfelt speeches about their work, and for those amazing performances that remind us how beautiful music truly is. When you strip it back to its core, I do think it's still beautiful. At the end of the day, it's a celebration of music, something that literally every single human being on earth enjoys. Everyone. And I think we all want to see the Grammys succeed. We all want to see them get it right. But it's very difficult. As I've established throughout this video, it's probably not going to happen. People are going to win in the 2025 Grammys that I might agree with, I might disagree with, you might agree with, you might disagree with. But ultimately, it's an event that brings us all together so we can have these fun little conversations. We can talk about things that matter deeply to all of us, as we do every single year. All this hubbub about the Grammys, to me, just means that we care. And shouldn't that be worth something?